I'm going to share a story of both fear and of trust. And also, I'm going to share in the process why this scar on my chin is a reminder of why I was not supposed to die in that fishing accident working on Alaska's Bering Sea back in 95. And I'll tell you, I have had this, entrepreneurial bug, if you will, since high school when I was in FBLA, Future Business Leaders of America. And at the time, I was planning to go to college and study business. But unfortunately, at the end of my 10th grade year, my father passed away. And that's a whole nother story right there. But once mom became the sole income earner, my plans of going to college came to a screeching halt because she just wasn't going to be able to afford that. So out of high school, I ended up doing the next best thing that I thought. I ended up joining the Army. I joined the Army, and that was a great experience for me. I learned so many valuable lessons that still serve me to this day. But I also realized that staying in the Army wasn't going to get me where I wanted to go. It wasn't going to get me any closer to my goal of becoming an entrepreneur and having my own business. So I got out of the Army. I came back home here to the Seattle area. And at the time, I'm thinking, well, if you want to start a business, it takes money. I was talking with my friend Scott, who I've known since first grade. And I was like, we were just having a conversation about this. And Scott's like, Kev, you should go down to Fisherman's Terminal in Seattle and hit the docks and get yourself a job on one of those fishing boats and go to Alaska, because those guys, man, they make all kinds of money. And I'm thinking, at first thought, that sounds like a good idea. So I did that. I headed down to Fisherman's Terminal and start hitting the docks. And I found out really quickly that those captains on the boats, they don't hire that way. The way they actually hire is through referrals from guys that have already worked on the boats. And they don't hire off the dock. But this one guy, this one captain, John Waddell, he ended up taking my number. And a couple of weeks later, he calls me and he's like, Kev, if I were to give you a shot, how fast can you be down here ready to go and ready to head to Alaska? And I said, I could be down there in 2 hours. And he's like, all right. He's like, pack your stuff, come on down here. And when you get here, come up to the wheelhouse and see me. And so when I got down there, I went up to the wheelhouse to see John. And he shared with me how nervous he was about this. And he's like, Kevin, he's like, I have never done this before. I've got a good feeling about you, but I've never done this before. And I am just praying that this works out. And I just don't want you to let me down. I don't want you to let me down. I don't want you to let the rest of the guys down. And we just had a good conversation about that. And afterwards, I'm just like, I'm thinking to myself, I'm just telling him, I'm going to work for you. I'm going to work for you. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking like, man, I'm going to work my tail off for this guy, because I so appreciated the fact that he put his trust in me a little bit and extended a little bit of trust to me. And I'll tell you though, when we got up to Alaska and actually started working, I'll tell you, John was right, because I had no idea what I had got myself into. And I'll tell you, half of your job is just learning to stay on your feet as this boat is rocking and rolling underneath you. As you're dealing with these high waves and stuff, and you're also dealing with wet, miserable working conditions, freezing temperatures, and the hours. My gosh, we would work anywhere from 24 to 36 hours a day. We'd sleep for 6 hours and get up and do it again. And on a good trip, we could fill that boat in about 2 weeks. If we weren't catching that much, I've been out at sea working under those kind of conditions for almost 2 months straight before. And so, there were so many times on that boat where I was like, man, Dad, if you can see me now, I know you got to be proud, because Dad, my dad, before he passed away, he always raised me with this good work ethic. In fact, so many times he would tell me, Kev, the harder you work, the more successful you'll be. And that was his best advice. That was his experience. He was giving me his very best advice at that time. Of course, since then, I've certainly come to realize that hard work, crushing it, hustle. And that's not necessarily the answer. It's not in alignment with who I am. I'd rather be in alignment and flow. But that, once again, that's a whole nother story. So I ended up working on this boat with John. Through the course of the next 7 years, I worked in a lot of different fisheries in Alaska. But with John, I always had this relationship with John because he was the guy who gave me my first chance. And so throughout the whole 7 years, I worked with John until my last year of fishing in 1995. And by the way, I should just mention here, my first year of fishing, I stayed up there for 10 months straight. And I came home with just a little over $120,000. And at that time, 1988, I was 23 years old. And the thing is like all the other guys were making double what I was because I was the new guy. I was the greenhorn. And so it let me know that, like, yeah, you can make money. And I did save up money to start my own business. And I'll tell you, the last fishing trip I will always remember, especially this experience, because on this night, we were in one heck of a storm. I mean, this is the kind of thing that you see in the movies. And in fact, if you ever saw that movie, The Perfect Storm with George Clooney, you got a really good idea of what this was like. But we were in one heck of a storm. And see, my way of dealing with my fear was to not look out at the horizon, to not look at how bad the storm really was. I would just concentrate on my job, which was to get the catch onto the boat. And I'd let John, the skipper, the captain up in the wheelhouse, I'd let him keep an eye on the big picture. And I'm going to tell you right now, that's trust right there. We, in fact, all of us, all of us guys working on that boat, we had implicit trust in John in the wheelhouse that he had our back, that he had our best interest in mind, that he would, keep an eye on that big picture for us. We also had implicit trust in each other, that each other had our backs. And see, that's a requirement. And I'm going to tell you what, that's not a requirement just in that situation. That's a requirement in business too. And I'll touch more on that in just a few. But anyways, all of a sudden, we get hit broadside with this huge rogue wave that came out of nowhere. And, John, I hear his thundering voice over the intercom system. And he's like, Kevin, duck. And before I could even react, we got hit broadside with that wave. It picked me up like I was a toothpick and hurled me face first all the way across that boat into the railing on the other side. And when I finally figured out what had happened and the water subsided, all I could even think was, thank God that I'm still on this boat, because if that wave would have thrown me just a couple inches higher, it would have tossed me right over the railing of that boat into the freezing temperatures of the Bering Sea. And in a storm like that, there is no way that John would have got that boat turned around in time to save me. I would have died right then and there. And part of what happened is my face hit that railing. This scar is from that accident. My front teeth also got knocked out. And in fact, one of my teeth was at such a sharp point that it cut my tongue. And it kept doing that. And of course, the nerve was exposed. And, when it's so dang cold up there, that ain't comfortable either. And I ended up going down to the engine room, getting a file to file the tooth flat just so it would stop cutting my tongue and I could finish out the fishing trip. And, John had asked me, Kev, do you feel like we should go back into port? Well, the thing is, it was a 2.5, 3-day trip back to port, and then another 2.5, 3-day trip to get back out to the fishing grounds. And the last thing I wanted to do was be the guy who shut down the whole fishing operation for everybody. And I was like, no, I said, I'll finish out we'll just finish out the trip. I'll deal with this. And the thing is, I talked about trust and being able to have trust in the people in your life. And the same thing is true in business, because trust, that is the lubricant, if you will, that just keeps everything running smooth. When we have trust, in somebody else's character, like with John, I explained that, you just know that they've got your back. And you also have trust in their competence, which you also know that they just know what they're doing. They are world class at what they do. When there are those two trusts in place, it eliminates all friction and just makes things happen so quickly. I mean, things will happen so fast that it makes your head spin. And so, I wanted to share that with you and just kind of, touch on this whole thing of fear and trust, because when we have trust, it allows us to get past the fear in spite of all of that. And so that's some thoughts this morning. And so, if you want to experience what it's like to be surrounded by people that you can have complete trust in their character and their competence, get a hold of me, because it might make sense for you to join us for one of our upcoming virtual roundtables. And I'd be happy to have a quick conversation, share a Google Doc one-pager with you to see if that resonates. And if it does make sense, I'm happy to invite you. There's no financial investment. There is a time investment required. But if that's something that resonates with you, let me know, and we'll just follow up accordingly.